But yeah, that line, it's just so good. I have so many complaints with the writing in this book, but that is such a great line. So I loved this in the book. And yeah, I like that they included it in the movie. I would have been so upset if they did not include this line. Hello, and thank you for joining me here at Why the Book Wins, where I compare books with their movie adaptations. My name is Laura, and today I am talking about the movie that has been long awaited amongst book readers, and that is It Ends With Us. The book is by Colleen Hoover. It was published in 2016, and the movie is directed by Jason Baldoni and was released in 2024. And right off the bat, I gotta say, I find it odd that this was directed by a man, and not only a man, but it is directed by the guy who plays Ryle. So I thought that was kind of an odd choice. I feel like in 2024, like, why is a movie like this not being directed by a female director? But regardless, I will say that if you have read this book and if you liked it well enough, I think the movie is worth seeing. They do stay very close to the overall story. And while it's not a perfect movie by any means, there's a lot to appreciate about it. And so I think it is one worth seeing. And from here on out, I'm just going to be getting into the details of the plot, which means there will be spoilers going forward. And so in both book and movie, the timeline jumps around from past to future as we follow Lily Bloom. But I'm just going to tell the story chronologically. So Lily's dad is a prominent, well-respected figure in this Maine town she lives in. However, what people on the outside don't know is that he is physically abusive to his wife, Lily's mom. And Lily grows up hating her dad. And in the book, we also see how she also starts to resent her mom for staying with the father. And there is a scene unique to the book, this is not in the movie, where Lily, she is concerned about her mom's well-being at one point because the dad is getting more out of control than usual. And so she interferes and she like jumps on the dad or something. And so when he pushes her off, Lily gets hurt and the mom has to drive her to the hospital. And as they're driving to the hospital, the mom tells her like, oh, just tell them you slipped and fell. Like, don't tell them the truth. And this is a big moment for Lily, and we read. When she said that, I just looked out my window and started crying because I thought for sure this was the final straw, that she would leave him now that he had hurt me. That was the moment I realized that she'd never leave him. I felt so defeated, but I was too scared to say anything about it. And at the very start of the book and movie, Lily's father has died. She is now an adult. And the mom asks her to give a eulogy. And she's like, just go up there and say 5 things you loved about your dad. And Lily goes up there, but she says nothing because she cannot think of 5 things she loved about him. And Lily's full name is Lily Blossom Bloom. Like, were her parents on acid when they named her? Because that is just the stupidest name. And, you know, the book and movie both make fun of her name, as well as the fact that she is named Lily Blossom Bloom and she loves flowers. But the book gives the backstory that Blossom was the mom's maiden name. And so they gave the mom's maiden name to Lily as a middle name. But it was still just such a ridiculous, stupid name. And I have read 3 Colleen Hoover books, and she seems to really like giving her characters the most ridiculous names she can think of. Like, it seems like they're names that a teenager would be like, ooh, isn't that such an awesome name? But then as you get older, you're like, I mean, that name's ridiculous. But Colleen Hoover just gives her characters these absurd names. And in the movie, you know, the main guy, his name is Ryle Kincaid, which is also a ridiculous name. And in the movie, I like that, you know, she laughs when he tells her his name and she's like, you just made that up. And he's like, no, I'm serious. It's for real. So I do like that the movie addresses how both of their names are just so stupid. Because the book addresses Lily's name being stupid, but it does not address the fact that, like, everybody has a stupid name, you know? But anyway, but back to teenage Lily. So she sees there's an abandoned house by their house, and she sees a teenage boy is living in that house, and he rides the bus. And so she drops off some food and like a sleeping bag for him. And from here, the two of them become friends, and this friendship turns into a romance. And she asks him, you know, about why he's homeless. And in the movie, we hear that his mom dates abusive men, and he even has a scar on his hand from one of the times he got in the way. And so it seems like he just left home because he didn't like the boyfriend, I guess. But in the book, in the movie, he mentions that he used to live in Boston, but we never get like the full story as to why he's homeless, where we do in the book. And so what happened is he and his parents lived in Boston up until he was like 9. And then I guess his dad died. I don't entirely remember, but they left Boston and moved to Maine. And then his mom started dating this other guy who was like very mean and abusive and treated Atlas poorly. And so he and Atlas butt heads, and then they kick him out, or he decides to leave. And so he stays at a friend's house. But then the friend, their family ends up moving. And so Atlas comes back to his mom being like, I mean, I need to come back home now. But she tells him, you can't. Like, my husband won't allow you to live here again. And he is 17 at this point. So he's like, I guess I'm just homeless until I turn 18 and I can join the military. But yeah, so he and Lily fall in love and eventually they do have sex. She loses her virginity to him. And this was a little different in the book because during their time together, he actually ends up moving back to Boston to stay with his uncle. But then after a few months, it is her birthday. So he comes back to Maine and he sneaks into her room to see her. And that is when the two of them have sex. Whereas in the movie, he's just there in Maine the whole time. But basically in the morning, the father hears them talking and he goes in there and he sees Atlas and he ends up beating him up horribly, like on the brink of death, it sounds like, especially in the book because he beats him up with a baseball bat, which was a bit over the top. But regardless, he gets taken away in an ambulance and then she never hears from him again. And in the book, he had told Lily that he would try to find her when they were older, but then he never does. So she almost feels like he abandoned her in the sense because he never tried to find her. But in the book, we hear that he actually did find her when she was in college. But while he was watching her from afar, he saw her kiss a guy. And so he's like, oh, she's already with someone else. It's not worth talking to her. But all of this is not in the movie. And then to talk about Ryle. So now Lily is an adult living in Boston. So Atlas loved Boston and he was like, oh, everything's better there. And so that is what inspired Lily to move to Boston. I also assumed that maybe initially she was hoping she would find Atlas. However, she does find him, but it's kind of too late. Anyway, she meets this guy named Ryle after her dad has died. And they have kind of like a flirty meet cute. However, he says that he doesn't do relationships, only one night stands. And she says like she doesn't do one night stands. She only does committed relationships. And so even though they're, flirty, she is like, this can't go anywhere. So there's no point in us seeing each other. And so they part ways and then some months pass and Lily opens up a flower shop and a woman walks in wanting to get a job. This woman is named Alyssa. The two of them become instant best friends. And then what do you know? Her brother is Ryle. So through Alyssa is how she ends up reconnecting with Ryle. But even though they have this chemistry between each other, although in the movie, I didn't love the casting of Baldoni, like the fact that he's the director and playing this character, like I said, is kind of odd. But I also don't know if I loved his casting, just in general. But anyway, the two of them have this spark between each other. However, again, she's like, I mean, this can't go anywhere because all you want to do is hook up with me, but I don't want to hook up with you. I want to have an actual relationship. And then what do you know? Because this is one of those cheesy chick flicks, he decides that he will change who he is for her and he is going to be in a committed relationship. But in the book, before he decides he will be in a committed relationship with her, we get this scene that is so stupid where he knocks on 29 doors to find her apartment, and when he does find her, he begs her to have sex with him, and he's like, please, 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 just let me bang you one time and then I can get you out of my head. Like, that's all I need. I just need to have sex with you once. And Lily agrees to this, which was ridiculous, but she goes on to say, you say this will make it stop? Meaning he's like, oh, make it stop, Lily. I can't stop thinking about you. Just let me bang you. And I'm saying the word bang because the way he talks about it is so degrading. And so he says the F word, I think, if I recall, being like, I just want to F you one time. And it's like, are we supposed to be liking this character? Like, this guy sucks. But anyway, she agrees to it. And then she tells him, you say this will make it stop, but I'm warning you right now, Ryle. I'm like a drug. If you have sex with me tonight, it's only going to make things worse for you, which is just such a stupid line. But ultimately she agrees, but then he falls asleep while she is in the shower, so they do not end up having sex this night. But yeah, this scene, Colleen Hoover, she says she wrote Ryle as kind of like the ideal guy that every girl would read and fall in love with. That way, when later things happen, it feels so gut-wrenching. But I'm like, really, Colleen Hoover? You wrote this scene thinking this is romantic, thinking that this is what a girl would want to hear? Like, this is just so stupid and it's degrading and it would be insulting for any man to say this to a woman. And then Lily's line being like, I'm like a drug is just so corny. And the movie does improve this scene because they change it where they are hanging out with Alyssa and her husband and then they part ways. And when they are alone together, he tells her like, because in the movie they have this thing where they say that they can just be friends. And so he says like, I can be friends with you, but first, like, I just need to kiss you. I just need to kiss you once and then I'll be over it and we can just be friends. And so the way he delivers the line, as well as the fact that it's kissing, it was just a much sweeter, flirtier, cuter, even sexier scene than what we got in the book. And then they do end up kissing in this moment too. And so yeah, this scene was much improved in the movie. But yeah, anyway, from here, she and Ryle do begin dating. He commits to her, and things just could not be going better. But then in the movie, they end up saying, I love you to each other. And then from here, that very night, they go out to dinner with Lily's mom. She's meeting Ryle for the first time. And they go to a new restaurant, and she sees Atlas working there. He is the guy who comes to serve their table. And so in both book and movie, she has an exchange with him where he asks like, oh, like, who's that guy? And she's like, oh, his name is Ryle. I'm seeing him now. And she's like, do you have somebody? And he's like, yeah, I'm dating this girl named Cassie. And she's like, oh, great. Like, we're both in happy relationships. But it's kind of a bittersweet moment as well. And in both book and movie, we find out that he was lying about Cassie in order to save face because Lily was with someone. He felt like he had to say he was with someone too. And in the book, when she later finds out that he had lied, at this point in the book, so in the movie they said, I love you, but in the book, when she sees Atlas for the first time, she and Ryle weren't even like serious about their relationship. And so she gets upset because she's like, what? If you had told me the truth that night, I could have left Ryle and been with you because me and Ryle weren't even seriously dating. And so she's really upset when she finds out he had lied about having a girlfriend. Whereas in the movie, when she finds out the truth that there is no Cassie, it's just like a brief exchange they have and it's not a big deal at all. And honestly, this line, it's said while they're walking through a door and it almost sounded like the audio was added in post. And so it seems like, yeah, this just like was not a big deal the way it was in the book. But once Lily and Ryle have been together for a while, a number of months, he is getting something out of the oven, but he does not use an oven mitt. And Lily, like, it's kind of a chaotic, hectic scene, and Lily is laughing and they've been drinking, and he goes to grab the dish without an oven mitt, and he gets so upset that Lily is laughing that he ends up hitting her and she falls to the floor. And in the movie, I really like the way they play this scene though, because initially in this moment, you're not sure if he hit her on purpose, because it almost seems like he reached for something hot and then his jerk reaction was to pull his hands out. And when he pulled his hands out, she was right there. And so he hit her. And so it comes across like it really was an accident. But then later on, as she is reflecting on these incidences with Ryle, she sees the truth of it, that like it was intentional and he meant to hit her, right? But in the moment, she is trying to justify things and make excuses for him. And so she even perceives it as like, oh, like it was just an accident. Like he didn't mean to do it. But anyway, he's very apologetic. However, she now like has a black eye and you can tell that like something happened to her on her head. And shortly after this, they end up going to dinner with Alyssa and her husband at Atlas's restaurant, despite Lily saying she doesn't want to go there anymore because she doesn't want to run into Atlas. But they're like, oh, it's too late. Like they already booked it. We have to go there. And so when she is there, Atlas sees her and he knows her dad was abusive and he himself came from an abusive home. And so he sees her face, he sees Ryle, he had hurt his hand, and he just puts two and two together. And so he ends up confronting Lily about this and she tries to play it off like it's not what you think, it was just an accident. However, all of this leads to Ryle and Atlas getting into an argument in the restaurant, getting into a fight. And then he also realizes that this is Atlas and Lily told him about Atlas. So then he gets very jealous of him, being like, you know, what's going on between the two of you? And she's like, nothing, I swear. And he's like, did you tell him about what happened? And she's like, no, he just saw my face, he saw your hand, and he just assumed the worst. But this scene in both book and movie, when he's like, did you tell him? It made me think of this tweet I've seen where it's like, abusers be like, how dare you tell people about the things I did to you, right? And it's such a form of manipulation where instead of acknowledging that what they did is wrong, they're acting like the victim is wrong for talking about it, right? So the way they turn the tables. But yeah, basically Ryle gets upset, but she calms him down and they stay together and it's all good. However, Atlas in both book and movie, he shows up to her flower shop and he writes down his phone number and he puts it in her phone, like inside her phone. And he's like, this is in case you ever need me, meaning in case things ever get out of control with Ryle and you need a safe place to stay. But she tells him like, oh, like, you know, it's not like that. I'm never going to need your number. But over time, there end up being more instances where Ryle is violent with Lily and he will even gaslight her because there's a part where he pushes her down the stairs. But when she comes to, he's like, oh, like you fell down the stairs and now I'm here and I'm helping you. But eventually things just progressed too far. And also like almost all of these instances after the hot dish in the oven, everything after that, his violence is always spurred by jealousy with Atlas in one way or another. But eventually he just goes too far, right? And so she ends up going to stay with Atlas. And in both book and movie, he had found Atlas's number. And so when she decides to leave, she no longer has his number. And in the movie, she just shows up at his restaurant. Whereas in the book, she says that she had memorized his number because even though she told herself, like, it's fine, like, Ryle is different, deep down, she was worried that she might actually one day need it. And so she had memorized his number. And so she is able to call him, and she goes to stay with him as a place to, get space from Ryle. And then also, by the way, at this point, Lily and Ryle had a quickie wedding, so they are now married. And when Atlas goes to pick her up, he takes her to the hospital to get her injuries looked at. And while in the hospital, she finds out that she is pregnant. And in the book, her injuries were more severe, like she had a head wound, whereas in the movie, she just has like a bite mark. And so it's almost like, why is she even going to the hospital for this? It almost didn't make sense. Whereas in the book, it made sense. She was going to the hospital because, she had a head wound. But to backtrack a bit, after one of these incidences of violence with Ryle in the book, Alyssa is there with the two of them, and Alyssa tells him, like, you need to tell her about our brother Emerson. And so he tells Lily that when he was 6, he and his older brother were playing around and they found their dad's gun, and Ryle accidentally shot his brother and killed him. And we read, Alyssa wanted me to tell you all of this because since that happened, there are things I can't control. I get angry, I black out. I've been in therapy since I was 6 years old, but it is not my excuse. It is my reality. And that line is kind of dumb. But we find out this backstory too in the movie. However, in the book, it is played like this is why Ryle is the way he is. Whereas in the movie, Alyssa tells her later after she has already separated from Ryle. And I don't know if the movie really plays it like this is the reason he is the way he is quite as much as the book did. But this was just such a dumb backstory. Like, again, there are so many things about this book that are just so far-fetched. And I get there are instances where kids will be playing with a parent's gun and one of them shoots the other, but it's just such a rare occurrence and it's just too far-fetched. And I also just don't like that she had to come up with an excuse for why Ryle is this way, right? Like, I wish there was no explanation at all, right? Like, he just is the way he is. Like, we don't need some backstory, some clear-cut reason, like, this is why. But again, if she felt like she had to give a reason, make it something more believable. Like, there's so much about this book that's just like, what? Like, that's so far-fetched and it's not believable and it's just too out there. And so I was not a fan of this backstory. But yeah, so she is with Atlas to get space from Ryle. And in the book, Ryle, before all of this happened, he had this 3-month residency or something coming up in England. And so he was going to be gone for 3 months anyway. And so while she is with Atlas, he tells her like, hey, like, I'm leaving to go to England. The apartment will be empty. You can come back home now. And so she eventually does go back home now that Ryle is gone. Whereas in the movie, Ryle stays in town. And it seems like maybe Lily just gets her own apartment at some point because she does live separately than Ryle. But in both book and movie, when Atlas is dropping Lily off when she is ready to go back home, he tells her, if by some miracle you ever find yourself in the position to fall in love again, fall in love with me. And the movie shortens this line a bit. He just says something like, when you're ready to fall in love again, fall in love with me. But yeah, that line, it's just so good. I have so many complaints with the writing in this book, but that is such a great line. Like, when you're ready to fall in love again, fall in love with me. Like, wow. Like, I feel like anyone out there, if you were to use this line on a girl, like, this would work. This is a really good line. So I loved this in the book. And yeah, I like that they included it in the movie. I would have been so upset if they did not include this line. But yeah, so eventually in the book, Ryle comes back, whereas in the movie, he never left town anyway. But over time, as she is pregnant, growing this baby, the two of them do end up reconnecting. She sets boundaries with him, but the two of them, they're slowly starting to be in each other's lives again. And she is kind of trusting him. And we even see them have some sweet moments where he helps her put together a crib and he puts her hand on her belly when the baby is moving. And in the book, she even moves back in with him. However, they are living in separate rooms. And the reason she is living with him is because, she's about to have his baby. And so he just wants to be there when she goes into labor. So they have come to a better place with each other. However, as far as their relationship goes, she tells him, like, I don't know what I want right now as far as us, but let's just take this one step at a time, essentially. But then she ends up giving birth, having the baby. And afterwards, while Ryle is holding their baby, she says she wants to name the baby, who is a girl, after Ryle's brother. So the baby will be named Emerson, but like Emmy for short. And so he is holding Emmy and she tells him, I want a divorce. And he's like, what? Like, he's just kind of confused and blindsided. And he's like, we don't need to talk about this right now. And she's like, no, we do. And she says to him, what if our daughter came up to you one day and was like, Dad, my boyfriend hits me, but he says he didn't mean to. It was an accident. And so I'm going to stay with him. Like, what would you tell her? And he realizes, like, I would tell her to leave him and never go back. And then we also get a bit more of this in the book where like Lily's mental thought process on this, and we read, there were times my dad and I spent together that I knew he loved me. He was smart, he was charismatic, he was driven, but I hated him so much more than I loved him. I was blinded to all the best things about him thanks to the glimpses I got of him when he was at his worst. 5 minutes of witnessing him at his worst couldn't make up for even 5 years of him at his best. And so she doesn't want her daughter to hate Ryle as a father, right? And she also doesn't want to just continue this cycle of abuse, right? Because then if the daughter grows up seeing her parents in this abusive relationship, chances are she will end up in an abusive relationship as well, similar to Lily and Ryle, right? So she is like, we need to stop the cycle of abuse right now. And we also need to save you and Emmy. Like, I want you guys to have a good relationship, which means we can't stay together and we need a divorce. And then we read in the book, we hold each other, we hold our daughter. As hard as this choice is, we break the pattern before the pattern breaks us. Cycles exist because they are excruciating to break. It takes an astronomical amount of pain and courage to disrupt a familiar pattern. Sometimes it seems easier to just keep running in the same familiar circles rather than facing the fear of jumping and possibly not landing on your feet. I'll be damned if I allow my daughter to go through it. I kiss her on the forehead and make her a promise. It stops here, with me and you. It ends with us. And then from here, we flash forward. In the book, I think it's like a year or less. Not that much time has passed. Whereas in the movie, it seems like it's been a few years. She is out in Boston when she sees Atlas. Again, they run into each other, and it seems like they are now both in a place where they can finally be together, and that is how it ends. Oh, also in the book, when she runs into Atlas, she's on her way to meet Ryle because she says like, oh, it's his day to have Emmy. Whereas in the movie, we don't see Ryle interacting with Emmy as she is older, so I'm not sure what the situation is there, but in the book, they share custody of Emmy. But even though this movie does stay true to the overall story, there are a number of changes that I want to talk about. First of all, we have poor Devin from the book, who is this cardboard cutout of a gay best friend or a gay friend. I don't know if they're best friends, but he is a friend of Lily's who appears in one scene, and he is there just doing all the stereotypical tropey gay guy friend things. And he is never in the book again. So he's just a pointless character, and the movie cut him out, which makes sense. The movie also does not include the scene when she is staying with Atlas and some of his coworkers / friends show up because it is a scheduled poker night and she and the friends hit it off. But again, these friends were pointless characters, and thankfully the movie cut this scene. And then also a big part of this book, when she is reflecting on her teenage years, she is reading her diary that she wrote when these things were happening. And at that time, when she was a teenager, she wrote her diaries as if she was addressing them to Ellen DeGeneres because she was a huge fan of Ellen and she loved the TV show. And that is also how her and Atlas bond, is when he is there at her house, he will shower, and then they will also just sit and watch the Ellen DeGeneres show. And so just Ellen in general is a big part of this book. In the movie, we get a nod to this where we see her writing in her diary and we see Dear Ellen. And then later we do see her watching the Ellen DeGeneres show, but she's not as prominently featured here as she was in the book, which of course makes sense because of the things that have come out about Ellen since this book was published. But then also Lily's flower shop in the book was so dumb. Like, her idea for how her flower shop would be unique sounds like something that a teenager who thinks they're edgy, like they think this would be such a cool idea for a flower shop. And we read, she's telling Alyssa about how she envisions her shop. And we read, what if instead of showcasing the sweet side of flowers, we showcase the villainous side? Instead of pink accents, we use darker colors like deep purple or even black. And instead of just spring and life, we also celebrate winter and death. We've all got a little bit of good and evil in us. I want to make that our theme. Instead of painting the walls a putrid sweet color, we paint them dark purple with black accents. And instead of only putting out the usual pastel displays of flowers in boring crystal vases that make people think of life, we go edgy. Brave and bold, we put out displays of darker flowers wrapped in things like leather and silver chains. And rather than put them in crystal vases, we'll stick them in black onyx or, I don't know, purple velvet vases lined with silver studs. And this, she even says, like, we go edgy. It's just like, oh man, this is not as cool as you think it is. This is so stupid. And again, it sounds like something a teenager would come up with when Lily is she's an adult. Like, what is this? This is so dumb. And thankfully, the movie did not go this route with her flower shop. And then also, speaking of their ages, in the book, Lily is like 23, 24, and Ryle is somewhere in his later 20s. However, in the movie, they are older because Blake Lively is in her late 30s. And the Ryle actor, he definitely looks older. I'm not sure how old he is. But one of the reasons they did this is because in the book, he is like a 28-year-old neurosurgeon. Like, no, you don't become a neurosurgeon when you're that young. That's so ridiculous. And all of these characters are just ridiculously successful, even though they're so young. Like Lily's flower shop just explodes and she's doing so well at only 24 years old. And then Atlas, he owns that restaurant they went to, and it's also incredibly successful. And also, they're renting these spaces in downtown Boston. Like, rent would be so expensive, but apparently they have the money to pay for it. And so just how successful everybody is. Marshall, by the way, is like a millionaire. It was just so ridiculous, especially because they're so young. And so the movie aging them up does make a bit more sense. However, even still, him being a neurosurgeon, it's kind of like him shooting his brother with the gun and just different things about this story where it's just so far-fetched. Like, sure, make him a doctor, but to be like a literal brain surgeon, it's just not as believable, right? And obviously there's neurosurgeons out there, but she should have given him just a more normal doctor kind of job. But yeah, I know people don't like the fact that they aged up the characters for the show. And in some ways, yeah, it kind of doesn't make sense in certain things, but for the most part, I don't know, it didn't really bother me. But one change I actually missed from the book involves Lily's mom, because there is a part after she has separated from Ryle. She hasn't decided if she's divorcing him yet, but she has separated from him. She is going to tell her mom, and she's nervous because her mom stayed with an abuser. So she's like, I'm going to tell my mom the truth about Ryle, but I'm worried because she is going to tell me to take him back. However, what the mom says instead is that she thinks it's good she left Ryle, and we read every incident. And, she's talking about her time with her own husband in relation to Lily and Ryle. And the mom says, every incident chips away at your limit. Every time you choose to stay, it makes the next time that much harder to leave. Eventually, you lose sight of your limit altogether because you start to think, I've lasted 5 years. What's 5 more? Don't be like me, Lily. I know that you believe he loves you, and I'm sure he does, but he's not loving you the right way. If Ryle truly loves you, he wouldn't allow you to take him back. He would make the decision to leave you himself so that he knows for a fact he can never hurt you again. That's the kind of love a woman deserves, Lily. And I love this scene in the book, and it honestly made me emotional reading it. I will say there were some scenes in the movie that made me emotional too. But yeah, I was so excited to see this scene in the movie. But what we get instead, she is helping Lily put together a crib, and Lily asks her, like, why did you stay with him? Meaning the father. And the mom says, because it would have been harder to leave and because I loved him. Which, it's still a good line and it's still a good scene, but I just missed that specific scene from the book when she explains why she's glad Lily is leaving, But then also something else I wanted to critique about the book is that it's set in Boston. As I've said, Boston plays a huge role in this story. They're constantly talking about Boston, Boston, Boston. However, the way this book is written, it does not feel like Boston. And normally I wouldn't care. But again, they make the fact that they're in Boston such a big deal. And so like, if you're going to make the city so prominent, make it feel like the city. And I do not live in Boston. However, I just got back from a 3-week stay in Boston. And so Boston life is fresh in my mind from being there for 3 weeks, which is a lengthy amount of time, and we were staying in downtown Boston. Yeah, this book, it did not feel like Boston at all. For one, the characters are always driving everywhere, and I feel like they would be walking or taking the subway. But also, Lily is not from Boston, and if she's driving everywhere downtown, I feel like she should have acknowledged what a nightmare it is to drive in downtown Boston if you're not from there. Locals, maybe they're just used to it, but we drove in downtown Boston and it was a horrible experience because it is just so difficult to drive there. And so just that right there, I'm like, this is not Boston. But also there was just nothing about the story that felt like Boston, like add some little details. All we hear is like, oh, in Boston, they have a funny accent. Like that's literally all we get, along with a few street names. abuse. And so it made me wonder if Colleen Hoover has ever even been to Boston. Like, why set your book here and make it such a huge thing and then not include any details that make it actually feel like Boston? But again, I'm not a local. I would love to hear from people who actually live in Boston or have lived there. Let me know your thoughts. Again, I know that's kind of nitpicky, but anyway. But when it comes to book versus movie, honestly, I think the movie easily wins. I know fans of the book will be very upset about that. Whether you agree with me or not, I would love to hear your thoughts down below in the comments. Let me know what you did and didn't like about this adaptation and this book. But I think Colleen Hoover in this book, she is best when she is writing about domestic abuse and just the thought process that goes on when you're in that situation. And then in her afterword, she talks about her personal experience with it. And so I loved her afterword. I would highly recommend reading that part. But when she starts getting into the narrative, story, the plot, and the character development and the dialogue, it's just so poorly done. Every character, every relationship, every occurrence, it doesn't feel real or genuine. It feels like what Colleen Hoover imagines. Like almost kind of like I said earlier, it's what a teenager would fantasize about what adult life must be like. And her friendship with Alyssa is just so perfect and it's so instant. And so that too, I'm like, this isn't how life works. And then when she announces her pregnancy, meaning Alyssa, that too just felt so cheesy and just so many things. I'm like, none of this feels real. This is like what someone wishes adult life was like, but it's not like this at all. And every character is just a cardboard cutout in so many ways. And she writes Ryle wanting us to fall in love with him. She even writes, I didn't want Ryle to be who he was going to be because I had fallen in love with him in those first several chapters, just as Lily had fallen in love with him. But like, he was a walking red flag. And yet Colleen Hoover, she wrote him not thinking he was a red flag, but thinking like, oh, every girl is going to fall in love with him based on these first few chapters because I have fallen in love with him too. And it's like, no, like he's so poorly written. Every character is poorly written. And so while I appreciate how she does add the domestic abuse, right? And that does add some complexity to the story. And yet even so, I feel like even that wasn't tackled in the best way. And so the message she is trying to send with this book, I love the message, right? And we get some moments that I think, again, when she's talking about being in the cycle of abuse and the thought process you're in when you're in that situation, those parts, yeah, we get some great sections. But again, the characters and the story itself, it was just very poorly written. And I've shared a couple quotes that show how I think it's poorly written, but this one is a real winner. Reading about the things my dad used to do to my mom kind of puts me in a bad mood. Reading about Atlas kind of puts me in a sad mood. I tried to fall asleep and think about Ryle, but the whole situation with him kind of makes me feel mad and sad. And that's an example of some of the writing we get here. And again, also the characters, like Devin, again, he's just like this stereotypical gay guy who shows up in one scene and never again. And so just, again, these like cardboard cutout characters who have no complexities or nuance. And so while the movie also has some things where it's kind of like, I would like more nuance here, and some of the lines aren't the best, but for the most part, they did improve some scenes and they did make some smart cuts. And I personally liked the casting of Blake Lively. I also liked the guy who plays Atlas. I thought he was good. And then the casting of young Atlas and Lily, I also liked them too. Jenny Slate, I do like her as an actor, and she works in this movie, but I feel kind of conflicted about her, but I thought for the most part she was fine. But Blake Lively, even though I like her, there were times where her character has like this awkward quirkiness that was a bit too much. Like tone down the quirkiness because it's kind of distracting. But I will say that I got more invested in the movie once adult Atlas shows up, because for one, that's kind of when the story does get more interesting in both book and movie. But I also thought that she and Atlas, like I liked their chemistry and their dynamic more so than the chemistry going on between her and Ryle. And maybe that was intentional, right? Because Atlas is the one who she should be with. And with Blake Lively, even though I critiqued some of her like awkward, funny, like it's meant to be funny and cute, her awkwardness, even though that got annoying, she really does come through in some of the heavier, more powerful scenes. And so while this movie has some scenes and some dialogue that just does not land, at the same time, there are other scenes that are just really powerful. And again, the movie made me a bit emotional. And so the book did too. But yeah, ultimately, I think the movie wins. I liked it better, but I am also just not a huge Colleen Hoover fan, to be honest. Again, I think she's a bad writer, but I did want to talk about her a bit more and about her personal relation to domestic abuse and this theme and why she wrote about it. And again, her afterword I loved, and I would recommend people read that. But she talks about how her mom was physically abused by her dad. However, when Hoover was very young, she had an older sister. So I think the older sister was 5 and Colleen Hoover was like 3. The mom left the dad. And this was a very courageous act, and they were very poor for a long time. But ultimately, she ends up getting remarried, and the stepdad is a great guy. And she still has a relationship with her biological father. And then we go on to read, when I finally did reach the point of marriage, the hardest thing I ever had to do was tell my biological father that he wouldn't be walking me down the aisle, that I was going to ask my stepfather. I felt I had to do this for many reasons. My stepfather stepped up as a husband in ways my father never did. My stepfather stepped up financially in ways my father never did. And my stepfather raised us as if we were his own while never once denying us a relationship with my biological father. Who I chose to walk me down the aisle wasn't really about my father, and it wasn't even really about my stepfather. It was about her, my mom. I wanted the man who treated her how she deserved to be treated to be given the honor of giving away her daughter. And so again, yeah, I just really loved what she shared and her personal connection to this story and why it meant so much to her. And so because of that, I do like the book more than I probably otherwise would have, just knowing where this comes from, right? So I do really appreciate that. And I will say, if you want a book that I think really does dive into the complexities of domestic abuse and a story that is just engaging with fantastic characters and they are so nuanced and complicated and amazing, is Big Little Lies. The book is absolutely fantastic, and I highly recommend you read that one. And also in It Ends With Us, you know, she wants us to fall in love with Ryle and see his good sides and to show how complex it is, right? It's not black and white. Physical abusers, they're not just like a horrible person and end of story. Like, they do have things about them that are good. And I think Big Little Lies highlights this even better at showing how jarring it can be to have someone who's so amazing in so many ways, and yet they also have this dark side. And so in general, Big Little Lies executes this topic so much better. But yeah, anyway, that is my thoughts on It Ends With Us. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. Like and subscribe if you have not already, and I will see you next time. Bye.